Hello, sir. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the show.
Kia ora, happy to be here.
Um, yeah. And how is Kahurangi? A bit sick during the week? Feeling better? Do you know?
Yeah, we've all had a pretty rough spate of illness in the Greens at the moment, but something's out there. I'm sure you've noticed a lot of people seem to have been getting sick this time.
What I have noticed is people are getting sick, but then we've got, even though it's still around, we've gone past that COVID thing because people are getting sick and going, oh, I've got a cold. And it's like everyone's just going, oh, it's just a cold now. People aren't really testing. And I'm not saying they should or shouldn't, but aren't really testing. It is kind of feels like even though the virus is still here, it is behind us and people's minds are not worrying about it, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, well, it's hard to find even test kits these days, so.
Yeah, well, I think that my wife said the other day that there are test kits at our local chemist, but they're like $11 each or something. So even
Oh,
that's
right.
all gone. So,
Yeah.
so there you go. Hey, welcome and thank you for joining us as a fellow Dunedin person. You are currently in Wellington. Are you Dunedin born and bred? What's the background for your story and your connection to Dunedin?
Well, like many people, I came over to Dunedin for university, and I fell in
Mm-hmm.
love with the city. I ended up becoming president of the student union and getting involved in the student executive. But, like many people who fall in love with Dunedin, couldn't find a job to stay in afterwards. So I had to move to Wellington and then find work in the public service, and then ended up moving back to Dunedin about 4 years ago at this point to take a job with the regional council. And then from there, I got elected as a list MP a couple of years ago. So that's a very quick process of my love affair with Dunedin.
Nice. And so you were working for the ORC, were you?
That was my previous job before I got
Yeah, yeah,
elected
yeah.
to the
Was that when Michael Laws was on it? And did you have any interactions with
Yes.
that lovely man?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at the ODT, he actually calls me out and a few other people for being part of a green cabal in the Otago Regional Council. So, yeah, he's had a one-sided beef with me. But look, I've just ignored him.
I think there's a lovely synergy talking to you tonight because even though I think Dunedin is kind of in the realms of studentdom, known more for the university, the Polytech is a very large part of the student life in Dunedin, and obviously there are a lot of people around New Zealand who kind of only associate Dunedin with tertiary education. And so you guys have launched, and as I said, you are the tertiary spokesperson for the Greens. You guys have launched a petition to save our Polytechs. I think that we can just start right from the very beginning, as Maria from The Sound of Music said, and just maybe you can explain to us why do we need our Polytechs saved? What's going on?
Well, look, we need our Polytechs saved because Polytechs provide people with the training they need to do the jobs they want,
Mm-hmm.
and so that people can do the work that communities can rely on. They're there to provide people with an opportunity to upskill, particularly learners who are more inclined towards the vocational education side of things.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives them opportunities to thrive. And for a lot of regions, a lot of Polytechs are really key to like keeping communities and work together to provide people with the opportunity to either train or retrain. So that's why we really need to keep our Polytechs together. The problem is that this government seems hell-bent and rushing through reforms which have had the effect of cutting nearly 1 in 10 jobs from the sector. That's just from 2023 to 2024. And
Mm-hmm.
over the coming year, it's looking like there'll be at least 650 jobs cut. Locally at Otago Polytech, there's been about 100 jobs that have been lost so far and more to come. So, yeah, it's really concerning that the government's kind of reforms of the Polytech sector are leading to a hollowing out of the regions and also the Polytechs that a lot of regions do rely on.
The way you kind of referenced it, you were talking about the skills needed. Is when I was around and AUT was known as ATI, Auckland Technical Institution, rather than Auckland University of Technology, Polytechs were really seen as sort of the place that I'm not going to say non-academic, but it was more practical courses, and the university was the more academic courses. So when you say teaching the skills, is there still an element of that, or is it are the Polytechs and the universities kind of delivering exactly the same outcome?
Oh, look, I think Polytechs are, as I've said, good for people who are more vocationally minded, who like
Mm-hmm.
prefer the hands-on mode of learning. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think we should have a diverse education system that caters to people with different learning preferences. And Polytechs are key to those people realizing their potential, who prefer that more hands-on learning, who want to become, mechanics and occupational therapists rather than people who, want to become economists or political analysts, for example.
Because it kind of reminds me, and this is not necessarily part of our conversation today. I was watching the news tonight and seeing, I think it was 89 school principals writing to Erica Stanford talking about the changes that they're trying to rush through with NCEA. The concern is that the new way of assessing will benefit the more academic, and it will harm the perhaps less academic, more practical kids. And it just made me think about that, because it sounds like that's a bit the same between university and Polytech still, even though it's not tertiary. What are your thoughts around that NCEA pushing through and the concerns that many principals are showing around it?
Yeah, look, I mean, we already know that this government doesn't really give a shit about, people who don't fit the range of preferences and backgrounds. So they don't really give a shit about working class communities who are more perhaps inclined to the vocational mode of education and doing more practical hands-on things. So it's just a continuation of that trend, unfortunately. We would love to see, Polytechs with the same status and same prospects as universities and vocational education in general. But unfortunately, everything this government has done since they've come into office has devalued the Polytech sector. And I'll give you an example of the inequity that they're perpetuating. One of the things that Simmons has done is take away equity funding for Maori and Pacifica students in the Polytech space, but kept it in the university space. So, I mean, that just doesn't make sense to me. Like, if you're thinking of like equity gaps, if they exist in the university sector, they'll also exist in the vocational education sector.
It's also quite bizarre if you're looking at like hypocrisy of a government who say they're not going to do what they call racial funding. So they cancel it in one sector, but then they keep it going in another. There's some mixed message. I mean, I'm not saying we support that message, but just identifying a mixed message there that they're putting out there.
Yeah, they've absolutely been inconsistent and incoherent, but that's no surprise.
What is it that we need to do from here? Like, I was thinking as well, and you'll have to educate me. I'm not across it entirely, but the previous government were bringing the Polytechs together under one tent, if we can put it that way. This government has said no, and now they're cutting, as your press releases have. What are they doing now compared to what the plans under the last government were?
So the previous government introduced Te Pukenga, which is basically a super polytech, which encompasses all of the polytechs around the country. I think in theory that they were able to retain regional branding, and in theory that Te Pukenga was supposed to introduce efficiencies of scale and regional and consolidation and things like that. Because, one of the things that this country does is compete with each other. So it was supposed to promote cooperation over competition. Unfortunately, I think some Polytechs felt like that the local voice and the local branding and local identity was undermined by Te Pukenga. And obviously the government was very much of that view. Penny Simmons, who's the former head of SIT, came in with a mission to reverse Te Pukenga. But I think, we all agree about the need to have a thriving Polytech sector. There's no question about that. But for me, the model is almost secondary to what the outcomes it's delivering for learners and what the outcomes are delivering for, the staff who make the place what it is. And unfortunately, the level of disruption that the minister has introduced is to the scale so that it's even more disruptive than the efforts to set up Te Pukenga, because the government has not provided any kind of support at all for Polytechs as they undergo this transition, except, and this is the interesting thing about it, remember how I said that Penny Simmons was the previous head of SIT?
Yep.
SIT is the only institution that has received support so far from this government. So, very interesting.
That's interesting. I mean, SITs always seem to be one that's sort of outside the bag of all the others with their zero fees plan. That looks like black magic to me. I don't know how they can do that, but yeah, they seem to be a different kettle of fish. You've said a couple of times you're talking about this government devaluing, and you're talking about cuts that they're making. Why do you think they are doing this? Why is the government devaluing the polytech sector, in your opinion?
I think this is all a move towards that. It's consistent with this government agenda of privatization. So they run down the public services.
Mm-hmm.
They force them to make cuts. For example, the cuts that were going to be made in North Tech, which is the Polytech in Northland, was going to cut courses like horticulture and forestry, which is absolute madness in an area like Northland. So when you run it down, when you cut courses that provide skills and training that regions need, and then you claim, oh, the Polytech isn't providing the skills and courses that the region needs, even though you force them to make the cuts because you haven't provided support. And then that's a pretext for like selling it off for parts and stripping it down and privatizing it and replacing the Polytech sector essentially with PTEs.
And explain PTEs to us all.
Private training establishments.
Mm-hmm. So privately owned tertiary institutions.
Yeah, privately owned tertiary institutions. And look, like some of them do a good job, but I think in general, the problem with PTEs is that you're adding on an extra layer of profit and not just focusing on the mission of having to educate people. So taxpayers ultimately end up having to pay more.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying with the example of the forestry in Northland, in general, what we see in this government is prior to getting elected, what they would do is they would point to the government and they would say, it can't do it. It's broken. It doesn't work. Smaller government's better. They said all these things about how government doesn't work. Then they get into government and they start actively passing legislation to break government, i.e., where is the forestry training in Northland after they cancel the forestry training? And then they step back and with wide eyes and a poly angle and a look go, we told you that government didn't work, but we have the answer. It's such and such with an LTD at the end of their name. It just sounds like it's another version of that, but in the education sector.
That's exactly it. And they're following this playbook in the health sector as well. They tried to do like a version of it with a school lunches program. Like Seymour came in with like this idea that he could cut it down to like 200 million a year and there would be no problems. But the reality is he's like it's under investigation from the Auditor General. There's been like a lot of problems with the revised program that he's put in place, from melted plastics and the meals to the meals burning students. So it's this idea that you can just cut things and that it will function as well, or that you can just outsource things to the public sector, to the private sector, is just totally bogus.
So if if a lot of people watching this content got their Christmas wish, which was a one-term government, what does a coalition on the left then do to turn around what's happening, especially to Polytechs? That's what we're talking about. What needs to happen to redress the issues that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think the fundamental problem that we've had with education is that it's not seen as a public good. Like even under the previous Labour government, Polytechs were having to operate under the model of like having to be financially viable. Like we don't expect police to be financially viable. We don't expect the military to be financially viable. Like it provides a critical public service, the skills and training. So the green vision for tertiary education is like fully funded, fully public, free for everyone, and it aligns with so many things that are in our green budget as well, like our future workforce training agency, like our Ministry for Green Works. So how we see it working is that you have free, fully funded, publicly owned Polytechs that are delivering the skills and training and jobs that that the region and many communities around New Zealand needs. And I think making tertiary education and politics free in general would help solve the viability issues. And I
Hmm.
think it works really well in Australia. They've got what's called free TAFE. TAFE is basically their Polytech. And when they introduced free TAFE, the TAFE enrollments went up by 25%. The number of Aboriginal Australians and women in courses and disabled Australians like went up quite dramatically, and the
Hmm.
life outcomes for these graduates was like really quite dramatic. Someone who did the free TAFE course was like, I think a third 39% less likely to go on to benefit afterwards, for example. So, like having free polytech and free tertiary education would be really transformational for the people who really do need it, and that's part of the green policy.
Yeah, it's fascinating when you say that education is not be seen as a public good, and you include the last government in that as well, because it makes so much sense. I mean, when we hear, particularly in this government, talking about smaller government privatization, that sort of thing, you go, well, and you've used a couple of very good examples like the military, but I always think about the libraries. Like you can't run the government like a business, because if the government was a business, then you'd get rid of the libraries, because they don't. The idea of a business is to return a profit, not necessarily, and they'll tell us through their trickle down economics, 1980s right wing ideologies, that if you provide the best product in the market of ideas, then you will be providing the best service. But we all know that's bullshit. We
Yeah,
know that what a business typically does, not all businesses, we've got to be careful, but typically does, is absolutely maximize their savings, minimize their costs to make as much profit as possible. And if you think about that when it comes to education, that is quite a scary thought.
yeah. I mean, look, we've seen the impacts of the private business in the supermarket duopoly and what's done to grocery prices. So
Yeah.
I think anyone who looks at that market will know that it's not delivering quality or quantity for anyone.
Yeah. So if we start to think about education as a public good, like you say, free education, so Greens would like to see all tertiary education free, or would you like to see like 1 4-year degree free, or like could someone under the Greens ideas come in at 18, do a degree, do a master's, do a doctorate free all the way through? What's the ideal magic wand waving for the Greens?
Yeah, look. The Green Policy calls for free tertiary education for all. That was our manifesto commitment for 2023. But you would do it through a phased approach. I
Hmm.
think I would start by doing it. If I was the minister for tertiary education, I would start doing it through the Polytechs, because the Polytechs need a support right now, and it would really solve a lot of their financial viability issues. Um, if they get a real boost in student numbers, which Free Polytech would do, and then you would progressively extend it to other qualifications once
Yeah.
the Polytech sector has had a chance to stabilize itself. But you'd start with the Polytech sector, and look, you should watch the space, because well, just keep following us. We'll probably have more to say about this in a few months' time.
I like your subtle hint at there's definitely a policy coming. I just can't talk about it now. Which is cool. Hey, last thing, and this is a bit of a kind of backwards question, but if this did end up being a one-term government, why do you think it is that the country would have turned against them? Like, is there one or two things that this government's doing that are the biggest things that are going to turn people against them if they end up being a one-term government?
I just think the main thing that's turning people off is how arrogant they are. Like they
Right.
don't even feel the need to like explain themselves or moderate themselves in some way. I think that's one of the things that this government is really different from the Key government on, because Key would use all these nice sounding words to try and like lull people into a false sense of complacency, and he would like make his policies look moderate. And when he did encounter like public opposition to stuff like mining off the conservation land, he would kind of back down from it a little bit. But
Hmm.
this government is like just so arrogant, and it's run by like a guy who actually it really kind of belies the idea that like having a business background is really helpful in politics, because he's letting his like extremist coalition partners basically dictate what's happening
Yeah.
to New Zealand. And I
Yeah.
think the third reason is like objectively everyone is worse off compared to how we were like 2 years ago. Like this country is broke. We're all like going to Australia. Like unemployment is like really high. Like the vibe is just really shit, man. And the government didn't do all of it, but I think you'd lay responsibility for like 90% of the stuff that's happening in New Zealand to them.
Hey, Francisco, thank you for joining us today. I can hear you got a touch of the lurgy still with you, so we do appreciate you giving us up some time, even though you're not 100%. Is there anything you want to leave the audience with as we say thanks and move on to our next conversation? Anything you want to leave them with?
Yeah. Oh, look, just keep an eye out on, we'll be doing some public meetings across the country around our Save Our Polytech tour, including one in Dunedin, probably on the 26th of September. And also keep your eye out on, potential policy development that may or may not be happening around the space.
May or may not be happening. Like, I don't know too much, but we'll see what happens. Hey, Francisco, get better. All of the Greens get better. If you got the guys who have been passing it around the caucus table, it sounds horrible, but get better. And thank you for joining us tonight. We'll let you go. All the best.
Thank you.